Welcome to today's Awesome Marriage Podcast. I'm so excited to tell you about our guest today, Justin and Trisha Davis. In 2012, they founded Refine Us Ministry. And they used their story of failure, loss, and transformation to guide others to discover renewed hope and purpose. Their new book is One Choice Away from Change. Their story is powerful. Can't wait for you to meet them. Let's go to the studio right now. Well, Justin and Trisha, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. I am so excited about this interview. So grateful that you guys were able to work this out into your schedule.
Thank you so much for having us.
I'm excited about it. Well, let's start at the beginning for your marriage, how you met, when you married, kind of up to where you are guys today, so people can kind of get a feel of who you are, and then we'll go into some of the things about the books.
Yeah, we met in Bible college back in 1993. Just crazy. Fell in love with each other and fell in love with the idea of like changing the world through the local church. So we spent many years in ministry and youth ministry. We've planted 2 churches. We've been a part of a church launching its like first campus. So we've done a little bit of everything. Currently, we're about to celebrate almost 30 years of marriage, which is
congratulations.
We got married when we were 12.
That's what we always say. Yes, I get that.
We have 5 kids. We have 3 biological kids, and then we adopted our youngest to 8 years ago when they were 7 and 9.
Wow.
And they are the oldest of 5 siblings. So their 3 younger siblings were adopted by another family. So we're just a huge unique blended family, add some, daughter-in-laws in there. And I can't remember everyone's names, but I try.
But you recognize them when they walk in.
That's right.
Hey, you.
Yeah, you're supposed to be here, even though I don't know your name. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. God, that's a lot of kids. So you guys have done a lot of parenting and so much church stuff. That's just amazing. All the stuff that you guys have been through with that. And none of those are easy.
No, I wish that when you feel called to ministry, it's like a life of comfort and, complete ease. But a lot of times, when you feel called into ministry, you don't necessarily know what you don't know. And I think that was Trish and I, when we first got married, we just thought if we love God, we love each other, everything's going to go up and to the right.
It's going to work. Yeah, absolutely. I think God kind of does it that way. He unveils things just step by step. Because probably if he gave us everything at once, we would run or something. So in the first book, I want to go back to it, Beyond Ordinary. When a good marriage isn't just good enough, you talk about your vision for your marriage and how the gradual breakdown of that vision led to this inauthenticity. I can't say the right, deception, sexual brokenness, infidelity. So kind of walk us through those years that you talk about in the first book.
Yeah. So Trish and I got married. I was still in college. I was summer before my second senior year of college. And, we had this vision for our life and for ministry. And as Trish said, we did youth ministry for several years. And then in 2002, we planted our first church. And from the outside looking in, it seemed like everything was going great. We started out with 12 people, and 3 years into the church plant, we had 700 people coming. People were finding Christ. They were finding a home in community, but there was a deterioration in my character and really in the health of our marriage relationship. And so we were 10 years into marriage and 3 years into this church plant. And what we began to realize is that Trish and I had become really good ministry partners and really toxic marriage partners. Mm-hmm. And all of this culminated on October 9th, 2005. I came home from church and told Trish that I didn't want to be married to her anymore, that I was having an affair with her best friend, and I wanted to be with her. And it wasn't a confession of remorse or repentance. It was just a confession of resignation. And, if you give to a relationship and you give, and what you feel like is deserved in return isn't reciprocated, a sense of entitlement begins to live in your heart.
Yeah.
And that person can never repay you all that you think they owe. And that's where I was with Trish. And obviously, she left the house hysterically. And, here we had this 3-year-old church. We had just raised $1 million to buy the building that we were meeting in. And the elders of the church came over and tried to talk me out of I wasn't going to be the pastor of the church anymore, but leaving my wife and my 3 boys who were 9, 6, and 3 at the time. And I was just in a really dark place and just couldn't hear it. And so I left and went and checked into a hotel, and a lady that went to our church, she called me when I arrived at the hotel, and she said, "Hey, if you have any hope at all of restoring your marriage, you're going to go to this counseling session we made for you tomorrow." And I just thought, counseling, I don't go to counseling. I'm a pastor.
Yes, we know everything.
Exactly. But by God's grace, I showed up at this counseling session, and the lady asked me, she said, "Justin, why are you even here? Like, what do you hope to accomplish with this counseling session?" And I said, if I can just be straight up honest with you, I want you to help me figure out how God's going to bless my life no matter who I choose. Like, that's what I want. And she said something, Dr. Kim, in that counseling session that became the linchpin for the restoration that God would provide for our marriage. She said, "I can help broken people. I can't help hard-hearted people." And I'd been a Christian since I was 10. I'd been a pastor since, for the last 10 years. I'd never really experienced brokenness. But over the next few days, Trisha packed up everything that I owned and kicked me out of the house because I wasn't repentant. And I lived with a family that helped us start the church. We were separated for 2.5 months, and we didn't talk for the next 10 days. And God began using that season of separation to break my heart for my marriage again. And 10 days after our separation, we started going to counseling together, and God began a restoration process in our marriage that continues to this day.
Wow. That's powerful. So Trish, what was going on with you with all this? That was a total surprise, I guess, when Justin told you.
Yeah, and really a collision of my belief in so many facets of my life, my identity, my relationships, my thoughts about God. And I grew up in a home where we grew up in the inner city, and my parents, they have these very unique, hard stories of how they grew up. But then I had this narrative, which is somewhat true, that, my parents came to know Christ when I was 5. I grew up in the church. It changed my life. And then I go to Bible college and I meet my Bible preaching man. And because we love God and love each other, we're going to live this up into the right life. And where we went in student ministry, great success. When we planted our first church, and we were planting churches where people were like, "What's a church plant?" Like, they didn't even understand like what that meant. And we had beautiful success. And it was like people were coming to the church that had never been to church or hadn't darkened the doors in years. And yet my marriage had fallen apart. And so it was this rock bottom experience of just, wait, in my mind, I did everything right. Like, God, I thought that if I honored you and honored my marriage, and like, I don't deserve this. And it was really the beginning of truly hitting rock bottom. And I tell people that what I discovered is that rock bottom is still solid surface to stand.
That's good.
When you come alongside Christ. And so that really started to define the people that we are today, of, that first year of just utter recovery. And I call it the crisis stage. Like, when you walk into the house and that picture frame that used to like welcome you home and say, this is your life, it no longer looked familiar, and you didn't even know if it was true. So those next, days and weeks, and even the next couple of years, were really dismantling false truths of what I thought about myself, I thought about my marriage, and discovering, well, what is God's vision for marriage? And teach us, Lord, how to do that. Like, how do we begin repairing what has been absolutely decimated?
What made you decide to go to counseling with Justin?
I'm a real follower, and I was still very much in the throes of the formula, just do the next right thing.
Sure.
And that and Dr. Kim, you're going to laugh at this, because the first couple of days, I didn't want to see anybody. Being ministry, everybody wanted to come and check in, and I know their hearts were well, but I didn't get off the couch. Our boys were 7, 9, 7, and 2 at the time. And I remember my mom handing me the phone, and it was this poor counselor. He probably quit after talking to me, but I got on the phone with him and I just poured my heart out. And I just told him, tell me what I need to do to get him to come back home. I just wanted him to come back home. And the counselor said, if you really love him, you will let him go. And I said, you're the worst counselor I've ever. I won't tell you really what I said, but I said, if I let him go, he's going to choose her. And he said, but he already has. And until you let go and allow God to do the work that only he can, you will always be Justin's scapegoat for all of his issues. And so counseling kind of entered the narrative of my story in an unwelcome way, but that phone conversation changed my life, and it changed the trajectory of what my next was. And my next was to go to a licensed counselor that could help me take the chaos that is my life and help me start, even if it's like one baby step, moving towards health rather than repeating the cycle of destruction.
Yeah. So much wisdom with that counselor, the things that he said to you, things you didn't want to hear, but you needed to hear at that time. Yeah, that's awesome. One thing I want to go back, Justin, when you talked about your heart hardening, when you look back on it, was that a process? Did you, because I have so many guys that I've worked with over the years that say, I don't know how I got here, but I got here. What was the progression where you felt from where you are, we're youth pastors, where we got a church plant, things going great, to where you were able to say, my heart's hardened?
Yeah, I think in the moment, I would have viewed it as a hardened heart. Looking back on it now, I'm 51, looking at the 30-year-old version of me, it was a wounded heart. You know what I mean? Like I, in the process of our healing of our relationship, I had to come to terms with wounds and addictions that I had not admitted or acknowledged. So
Sure.
I was sexually abused when I was a kid and didn't admit it or talk about it until the affair came out. I struggled with pornography for the first 10 years of our marriage, didn't confess it, lied about it. And so those things put me in a posture of hiddenness. And so, my whole goal was to not necessarily be known, it was to be loved. And I thought if Trish ever knew these things about me, she wouldn't love me. So I got to stuff it down as much as possible so that I'm not exposed. And, intimacy is what God created us for. And that means to be fully loved and fully known. Intimacy is to be fully known and know that we're fully loved. And every time we compromise truth in a relationship, we limit the amount of intimacy we're capable of experiencing. And so my heart eventually did get hardened toward my marriage, but it didn't start from a malicious place. I think it started from a very broken and wounded place.
That makes total sense. Yeah, there's so much that we have, and I think that we don't want to come out, and yet it seems like God lets it come out one way or the other.
Right.
Because we're not going to get better until it does. But I know that's not uncommon at all. For say, if she knew or he knew, they wouldn't be with me. They wouldn't love me anymore. And my experience has been when God's in the middle of it, just the opposite.
Yeah.
That can happen. Yeah. So a lot of times I see couples where one or both makes this choice that's harmful, where it might be something like porn and hiding it or different things. It's hard for the marriage, and the consequences of that choice don't just happen immediately. They play out over time. I think when we do something that's bad in our marriage and with consequences right there, then I think it's better. It's when things just kind of play out over time. So what are some of those choices that you see people make that lead to the harmful things?
I think one of the areas is self-deception. That we tell ourselves we're really not as broken as we think we are. This is just a little bitterness, or this is just a little lie. But then they start to snowball, and the accumulation of them, then we feel stuck. We feel like paralyzed, that now it's too big to hide, and we're so fearful that we're going to be found out. And in the story for Justin and I, all of his sins were obvious, right? He's the one who had the affair and the porn addiction, all of these things. And I could have said, you go get fixed because you owe me that. With your confession, I lost everything, my community, my church family, we eventually had to sell our home. Like, our kids lost their lives. We lost the identities that we had known. But the reality is, I had to choose to be a truth teller myself. And what I began to recognize is, I tell couples all the time, when somebody has an affair, there is no ownership from the person who had their trust broken. You never caused someone to have an affair, but affair doesn't happen overnight. You don't drift to those things. So it can't be pinned on you, but at the same time, it's a need and a health to say, okay, how did I contribute to the breakdown of our relationship? And when I began asking that question, I realized that I had a bitterness issue, a resentment issue long before the affair that was wrapped in my parents' divorce after 25 years of marriage. And we were married for a year. And so some of the experiences we go through, we don't even recognize how they mark our heart until we have this experience where they're so exposed that we can't hide them anymore. And really, the gift that God has given us through our story and what we write about in Beyond Ordinary is, what does that redemption look like? How do you walk that out? What is the process? And the first process is choosing to tell the truth to yourself first and to each other, no matter how hard and awful it may feel. Jesus knew what he was talking about, that the truth sets you free, because it doesn't give any room for the enemy to twist or manipulate in any way, because there's no more place to hide. And when God is your hiding place, you don't have to hide anymore.
Yeah, I think that's something that I see most wives struggle with in a situation where the porn affair is because they're so hurt to begin to say, what did I do? Like you said, I know that's a hard place to get to, and probably didn't come overnight to get there. But I think you saying that, I think is such a good example to people of why you need to take your responsibility, because then you opened yourself up to God doing things in your life that were going to make you better. And as you guys work back together, certainly the marriage better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was one of the biggest gifts that Trish gave me, was that she wasn't just telling me to go on a journey and figure it out. It's like she was saying, hey, you have a journey to go on, but I'm going to go on a journey as well, and trust that God's going to bring us together in that process.
Yeah. Do you see that some of we talk about the choices that people make, do you see those become patterns in a marriage relationship?
Yeah, that really is one of the reasons why we wrote One Choice Away from Change, is because one of the things that we've experienced, and I think as we have talked and worked with couples over the last 15 years, we realize that nobody struggles with anything new. Most of the time, what's so exhausting and so discouraging is we struggle with the same things over and over again. There are these repeated patterns that we try to white knuckle our way through, or we try to promise that we'll never talk to that person like that again, or we're never going to lose our temper again, or we're never going to, spend again. And then a few months later, we do. And helping people recognize it's not just what you're choosing to do. You have to discover why. Why are you making the choices that you're making, so that you can break those patterns and those cycles that are ultimately leaving your relationships wounded, whether you're married, whether that be a relationship with a parent, or a sibling, or a friend, or even like an employer. We have these relational patterns that spill out into all areas of our life.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times it is behavior modification. Well, I can do that for a while, but if we don't get to the root, you can only do behavior modification so long before it kind of falls apart. Yeah, that's really good. Trisha, you talked about some of the things in your past and working things by that. How did that just, as you started into that, was it just almost surprise in the word I want, but just as God started revealing things and started coming up, what was that process like for you?
When we wrote our first book, it was strictly about our marriage. And to be honest with you, and you as a counselor, tell couples this is like a 3 to 5 year journey of discovery. I think all these years later, 20 years of deep diving into not just our marriage relationship, but all of my relationships forced me to go beyond. Like you said, if Jesus gave us everything all at once, we'd be like, no, I'm peacing out. I can't handle that. And I think that's true for me personally. And for us, Justin, we share this in the book, had this crazy experience that we, won't take time to go into details here, but just sometimes parts of our story we don't even know are a part of our story. And in 2022, I did just an innocent dive into ancestry.com to start a family tree on the Hispanic side of my family that's aging and starting to pass away. I want to hold on to their stories. And when I got the results back, I had zero Hispanic heritage. And so in the same week, Justin and I both discovered that our dads weren't our biological dads. Mm-hmm. And it was like this bomb of my past that I had no idea. And it was obviously grief, and the process of forgiveness is all part of that. But what I recognized in the choices that were made that I didn't know about, and the choices that I was making as I was growing up, was sometimes how people perceive the truth of who you are isn't always true. Yeah. That you could be in the same car accident, but you're going to have a different perspective. And why that is such a freedom statement is that sometimes we don't go to our past because we've been told a different narrative that didn't really happen, or that shouldn't have affected you that way. That's not how that person handled that. And so we can't reconcile what we've been told isn't true. Yeah. Another aspect is words that are spoken over us that we have no idea have become messages to our value or our worth. And for some of us, messages were spoken over us that we were such good kids. You were the good one, and I could just trust you. And the message it left us with is, I have to be perfect to be loved. And then we carry that into our marriage relationship. So doing this deep dive into my past, I tell people you're not ousting yourself. You're excavating the truth about your story so that you can understand it and make peace with it, for it to not determine your future.
Mm-hmm. Break the cycles, break the chains, those kind of things. Did you ever, in the process, think about, I can't do this?
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe I said I should tattoo that on my body somewhere. So I don't have to say it. I'll just hold my hand up and I can't do this.
I bet. Yeah. But I think what I see is from, because I've had people say the same thing, and because I know I don't know it's hard. I haven't been through that part, but I know I've walked through and watched a number of people, and just as they turn back to God, it seems like God gives them the strength to take that next step, whatever that is. And it is a process, like you said. And I think sometimes, I think in our culture, we want things to be fixed so quickly. And we think, okay, we'll do about 3 months of counseling and we'll get this done. And to realize that sometimes it takes a lot longer than that, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it hit me. I was sharing that our oldest son is a church planner, and we've been helping out with this church, and he gave a message of, how Jesus tells us how to pray in the Gospel of Matthew. And all of us have heard that over and over again. But for some reason this time, I think in the process of writing the book, my perspective on what Jesus was telling us is that, give us this day our daily bread. The reality that life is going to cause us to still be in need. We never arrive. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Where, bread is sustaining to our physical bodies, forgiveness is sustaining to our soul. And so our need to find resolution and completion frustrates us because We felt like we forgave, or we felt like we did all the self-discovery. And then we wake up and we're like, oh no, wait, I got to choose this again. It's frustrating. What I love what you said, Dr. Kim, that I think is the biggest gift is allowing a person to be okay that they can't do it.
Yeah.
And not have to fix it in that moment, but for them to feel so safe to go, you know what? You can't today, but you're still really loved. You can't today, but God still has a plan. And that doesn't shift or change because of your circumstances or your feelings today. And oftentimes, just that validation of not having the answers, of making someone feel seen and heard, is like the first step to be able to choose something different.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. I remember a lady that had been, her husband had an affair, and as we were talking, she had 2 kids, and they were a little bit older, so they could help with things. But she would come in the evening and just lay on the couch, and just she couldn't get off. And this went on for a long time. And then she came in the next week one time, and she said, "I came in from work, and I found myself in the kitchen starting dinner, and I realized I didn't go to the couch today." And it was such a huge step for her. It wasn't even conscious. It was kind of like, I got some normalcy back right now. I did what I used to do before all of this. And it is. And Justin, you talk about too, about with the broken marriages, a lot to overcome. From your perspective, how do you get past those feelings? Because you had a lot to go through.
Yeah. And I think for many of us, we place ourselves on a timeline and say, okay, I got to get this figured out as quickly as possible. Not necessarily because we really want healing, we just want the pain to go away. And what I realized in the reconciliation process is there's going to be pain either way. It can be destructive pain of you staying the same, or it can be redemptive pain of choosing the process of restoration and reconciliation. And sometimes that process doesn't include a healed relationship, right? You know, a lot of the people that we talk to, their spouse couldn't, make it work. But one of the things that I've realized is, and we say this to couples all the time, okay, let's say that this does take a year. Let's say it takes 2 years. But you have a different marriage at the end of 2 years. And the next 25 years, the next 35 years is exactly what God created you to experience. Would that be worth it? And when you frame it that way of, okay, I'm going to go through this. One of Trisha's teaching, one of the passages she uses out of Hebrews, and it talks about how, after God's discipline, we are, there'll be a right living that, for those who are trained in this way. So take a new grip with your tired hands and stand firm on your shaky legs. Like there's this acknowledgement that healing is hard, but then it's worth it as well. And I think that's the picture that we want to have in mind, isn't necessarily of the momentary pain that we're going to experience in the process of reconciliation. It's the product that we will have at the end of that restoration process that we get to live in every single day.
And I think your story, people can see where you are today, and they can see that it's worth it, because the couples I've worked with that do the work for a couple of years or for whatever it takes say things like, I hated what happened, but I wouldn't change a thing, because our marriage is someplace now that it would never have been without that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And what we have recognized is what we're really saying is we learned how to operate in healthy ways. We didn't just have behavior modification. We had a transformed heart that when life comes at us and we get on each other's nerves, there's core questions that have been answered, that connectedness of, like, are you going to be there for me when I need you the most? Am I safe with you? Do you love me? Like, when those are solidified, then you don't hit rock bottom when the dishes aren't done the way that you thought they should be.
Yeah.
Or we get trapped in the small little circumstances when we recognize there's core issues amiss here. And when you're talking about betrayal trauma, as you know, like it's really hard to work that out with someone that you want to comfort you, that is also the person that caused you pain,
Mm.
is a very
Yeah.
difficult and delicate balance. And in betrayal trauma, someone else you don't trust is yourself. You think, how did I not see it? How could I have been so stupid? Like we say these really strong words over ourselves. And so when we say, I would never go back, it's because now we've recognized how to answer those questions. And sin never makes sense. And we're not told we'll never hurt again or never fight again, but it's recognizing at the core issues. I always give couples the picture of like a weed. Everybody knows, like when a weed pops up in the garden, you're like, oh, I just need to chop that off. But if that's all you do, then what pops up next is a couple of them. But when the weeds take over and you forget what flowers look like, you settle for that's the best it's going to get. And the thought of uprooting the whole entire garden seems like impossible. And when what happened in our story of just literally my life falling apart, that was my one choice of what are the seeds I'm going to sow? Am I going to sow the same seeds of bitterness and resentment? Or am I going to learn to do something different? That doesn't mean I'm an expert. It just means that as much of destruction that happened, the same is true for health. Like you can build health upon health upon health that makes you say crazy things like, I would never take it back because I've learned how to live in a way that is honoring to God and honoring to my marriage. And I wouldn't ever want to give that up.
Yeah. So good. So good. Let's go. When I teach funeral counseling, one of the things I say to couples, and sometimes I get funny looks, and that's probably because they need to hear it. But I say, if you're in a relationship where that person can't forgive you, run. Why is forgiveness so hard for us?
I think for many of us, the injustice of what's been done to us is so great, we equate holding a grudge with making that person pay. And what happens so often, especially in a marriage relationship, is when you're trying to make that person pay by withholding forgiveness from them, the first person that is hurt is you. And so now you have this wound that caused you to be hurt. And now you also have a new wound of resentment. And so it just begins to build on itself. And I think for a lot of people, that's where they struggle. Where I struggle, Dr. Kim, is pushing it away and ignoring it. So I don't necessarily get mad at it. I don't take stock in how something wounded me because I just say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And so I almost discard it. And then it comes back at a time when I may be triggered by something else, or I may be reminded of it. And I'm like, why did I not deal with that then? And so I think we can equate ignoring something with forgiving it, or minimizing it with forgiving it. And either of those two things, holding on to it too long and being resentful about it, or compartmentalizing it and acting like it doesn't exist, can be equally corrosive to a relationship. And it causes you to miss out on the fullness of God's grace, because Jesus doesn't ignore our sins, but he doesn't hold on to them either. He, as far as east is from the west, as far he removes them from us. And so finding a balance between those things can only be found through the grace of Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that so many people that I work with, they know God forgives them and they know their spouse forgives them, but they can't forgive themselves.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to someone that says, I can't forgive myself?
I think that shame is like a silent assassin of spiritual transformation, because there's this aspect where we have confused shame with humility. So we think if we feel ashamed, then that is humbleness, which I think that is bad theology. And we also have confused shame with conviction. So conviction of sin means, what you're doing isn't right. You need to repent and turn the other way and make a different choice. Come back to God. That's conviction. That's from the Holy Spirit. Where shame is this voice of the enemy saying, hey, you're never going to be able to change. You're always going to be that way. Everybody is going to know the truth about you, and you are what you've done. And when we feel that shame and buy into it, what happens is we minimize what Christ did on the cross for us to help us overcome our shame, because Scripture says there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ. And I'll never forget, a couple of years after the affair, we were in our kitchen. Trisha and I were having this conversation, and she could just tell I was just overcome with shame. And she said, I just don't understand. She's like, I've forgiven you. God has forgiven you. You have to forgive yourself. She's like, otherwise, all the work that we've done, it doesn't matter if you continue to walk as if none of that work has been done. And it was just this freeing moment for me. I wish I could say it was like a light switch that turned on. It wasn't. It was a process that I had to go on of figuring out how to walk through the process of forgiving myself to where I didn't feel, I felt like, well, if I forgive myself, it means I got away with it. If I forgive myself, then I'm not necessarily taking responsibility. And none of those things were true. I had taken responsibility. And I had, there was a high cost that I paid, but I didn't have to pay the price every single day and walk in an identity of shame and guilt, because Trish had forgiven that, and so had Jesus.
Absolutely. And it's so well said, because helping people see that shame is not from the Lord, that it is from the enemy, and because it just digs you a deeper hole when you with that.
And I don't know of any person that's changed their life or experienced transformation through shame. And so I think as spouses, we think, well, if I can shame my spouse into what they're doing wrong, then they're going to change. And it's kindness that leads us to repentance.
Yes.
Not shame.
Shame doesn't work. Yeah. No. Especially with your spouse. Exactly. That's so good. So I love the last 4 words of the book. One choice changes everything. So much hope in that. How does that play out?
Our goal is to come alongside the reader that feels, we talk about the messy middle of how when life just feels so chaotic, we want to hide it and shove it in places. But then it you've shoved so much under the rug, you start tripping over it, or there's so much in the closet, you just kind of inch it just a little bit, trying to shove just a little hurt in there, and then it just comes spilling out. But really, in that spilling out is a moment of recognizing the truth of your life. And what we have found, that most of us feel stuck in decision fatigue because there is so much work to be done. And so that statement is twofold. One is to remind you, you are not as stuck as you think you are. And 2, just start somewhere, because one choice literally has the power to change everything. And it most likely isn't going to happen overnight, but one choice to tell your mess where to go and appropriately grieve it, acknowledge it, and then repurpose it for redemptive pain. It doesn't put the mess in a hiding place. It puts the mess in a purpose where you can grow. And we realize that one choice away from change isn't an either or, it's life in the and, that you can experience messy parts of your heart and still grow. Yeah. But you have to start somewhere.
Yeah, that's so good. So good. Anything you'd add, Justin?
No, I mean, as she was talking, I was just thinking, man, that was good.
Like, I saw your face, and I thought, I could tell. And it was really good, because it is a step forward to change. And I love one thing you said in the middle of there, so people didn't miss it. You talked about grief. I mean, you have to grieve that. It's so important. I think sometimes we try to scoot past that part of it, but anytime our life doesn't go the way we thought it would, it's a grief situation, whether my spouse did this or whether anything like that. And so I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's such an important part, I think, of the process.
Yeah. We talk about grief in the book, and, these cycles, it's a part of living. And sometimes we just want to never have to face it again. And here, for me personally, I have spent 20 years in deep diving into understanding grief. And then my father passed away in January.
I'm sorry.
And thank you. And I was shocked and disappointed in how I could not handle it, which most people think, Trish, that's so silly. This is your father. Well, I know, but still, it's like I had all the tools. I was shocked. I was shocked at the deep, utter, break my heart feelings. And I remember Justin saying to me, you have to stop gaslighting yourself to grieve. And I just share that story for the listener that just is tempted to feel like, I'm so ready to arrive. I'm so ready for Job's second half. So we can walk in health, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to experience hurts. What's most important is that we have those tools to go to when we feel like there's no other choice. There is empowerment when you know that there is a choice that you can make. It allows you to live with hope and not hopelessness, and it literally changes everything.
That's powerful. Wow. This has been an amazing conversation. Any final thoughts that you'd want to leave people with?
No, I think, the heart of the book is it's not about Justin and Trisha. It's really about what God can do in one life, in one relationship, through one choice. And that's the starting place, right? And so we share our story in a vulnerable way, not to shine the spotlight on us, but to point the reader to the change that is available to every single person, regardless of your circumstances, regardless of your relational status.
Yes.
So that you can not just experience behavior modification, but really heart transformation.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, the first book was Beyond Ordinary. Got this one here. Whoops, that was here. That's Away from Change. I read it last week. Man, if this podcast has touched you, pick up the book. It will bring so much healing as how they flesh all that out in the book. Website is refineus.org.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Other places they can find you?
You can find us on Instagram at refineus.
Okay. That sounds good. Guys, thank you for sharing your story. It's so encouraging. It just shows what God can do when we let him, and that we're willing to kind of follow the path that he lays out before us. Thanks a lot for sharing today. Hopefully touch base again soon.
Thank you so much for having us.
You bet.